The Crystal Room at the Oberon was less a dining space and more a silent cathedral to wealth. Light from the city below refracted through a constellation of hand-blown chandeliers, casting soft, forgiving glows on tables set impossibly far apart. The air itself seemed different here, filtered and still, carrying only the hushed clink of silver on porcelain and the faint, clean scent of lemon oil and old money. In this theater of power, the staff were trained to be ghosts. They moved along the deep pile of the carpet like whispers. Their presence felt only in the sudden appearance of a chilled water glass or the silent removal of a finished plate. They were the invisible machinery that made perfection possible. Clara was the most invisible of them all. At 23, she had mastered the art of self-effacement. Her uniform was a crisp, anonymous shell of black and white. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it erased the lines of her face. Her expression was a carefully constructed neutrality, a pleasant void that invited no conversation and betrayed no thought. She had been working this shift for 6 hours, a long, rhythmic dance of service and retreat. But now, her focus was on a single table in the corner, a secluded alcove with the best view of the skyline. It was occupied by 2 men. One was Mr. Adnan, a man whose name was spoken in financial journals with a kind of hushed reverence. He wore a traditional white thobe and gutra, the pristine fabric a stark, dignified contrast to the dark, modern opulence of the room. He radiated a calm, immense authority. Opposite him sat Khalid, a man who wore his European suit like a second skin. He was handsome, sharp, his gestures expansive and confident. They spoke exclusively in Arabic, a river of smooth, polite negotiation flowing between them. On the table, nestled between a bottle of sparkling water and 2 untouched coffee cups, lay a thick leather-bound document. A pen, a gleaming black Mont Blanc, was placed beside it. This was the final act, the culmination of weeks, perhaps months of work. The air around the table was tight with significance, the $200 million question hanging, unspoken, in the quiet space between them. Clara approached, her coffee pot held steady, her eyes downcast. It was her job to perform one final, silent refill before the ink sealed the deal. As she leaned forward, a silent automaton performing her function, the language the men were speaking washed over her. It was not noise. For Clara, language was a landscape, each dialect a unique topography of history, class, and place. And the Arabic spoken at this table was the formal, elegant dialect of international business, a language she knew intimately. Khalid was speaking, his voice a warm, persuasive murmur, summarizing the final clauses for Mr. Adnan's benefit. He gestured towards the signature line, a smile of impending triumph playing on his lips. Mr. Adnan nodded, his expression one of serene trust. He was listening to a man he believed to be a peer, a brother in culture and commerce. And then it happened. A single word, a small, insignificant colloquialism for the concept of, in full, that Khalid used to add a touch of casual emphasis. It was a tiny crack in a flawless facade, a single misplaced thread in a perfect tapestry. To Mr. Adnan, it would have sounded like a minor, friendly flourish. To anyone else in the room, it was meaningless sound. But to Clara, it was a gunshot in a library. The word was wrong. Not just grammatically incorrect, but geographically, culturally, and socially impossible. The origin of that specific term was a small, coastal fishing region over 1,000 miles from the sophisticated financial hub Khalid claimed as his home. It was the language of dockworkers and sailors, not of the old, educated merchant family he purported to represent. It was as jarring and out of place as hearing a Silicon Valley CEO use a 19th-century farming idiom from the rural Deep South. She froze for a fraction of a second, the coffee pot hovering over the cup. Her practiced invisibility faltered. Her heart gave a single, hard thud against her ribs. Khalid didn't notice. Mr. Adnan didn't notice. The universe continued on its axis. But for Clara, everything had changed. The silent, orderly room had suddenly become a place of immense and hidden danger. The man in the expensive suit was a phantom, an imposter wearing a stolen language like a mask. And the dignified man opposite him was about to hand over a fortune to a ghost. The knowledge that now burned in Clara's mind was a secret she thought she had buried for good. It was the ghost of another life, a life before the black and white uniform and the practiced silence. It was the life her father had built for her. Professor Evan Reed had been a linguistic anthropologist, a man obsessed not with words, but with the worlds they contained. His specialty was the intricate web of Semitic languages, and his passion was deconstructing the hidden signals, the tiny tells in pronunciation, the subtle shifts in grammar, that revealed a speaker's entire history. Clara's childhood lullabies had been recordings of Bedouin poetry. Her bedtime stories were phonetic charts. While other kids were learning to spell, she was learning to distinguish the guttural kaf of a Damascene academic from the softer version used in Cairo. Her father had called it the science of origin. He taught her that language was an unforgeable passport, an accent the one piece of identity that could never be truly faked. Listen to the music, not just the words, he would say, his study filled with the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco. The music tells you where they've been. It tells you who they are. After his sudden death 2 years ago, that world of sound and meaning had shattered. The academic scholarship she'd won felt meaningless. The university halls felt cold and hollow. Grief had hollowed her out, and in its place, she had sought refuge in anonymity. She had walked away from her doctorate, from the world of books and theories, and found a strange, monastic peace in the rigid, silent service of the Oberon. Here, no one asked about her past. No one cared about her mind. She was simply a pair of hands, a silent presence. She had wanted to be invisible, and she had succeeded. But now, her father's voice was echoing in her head. The ghost of his life's work was demanding to be heard. The knowledge he had given her, once a source of intellectual joy, was now a terrible, crushing weight. It was a truth that belonged to a dead man and his forgotten daughter, a truth that was about to be ignored as a $200 million lie was signed into existence. Clara's body completed the motion her mind had paused. She poured the coffee, her hand as steady as stone, a testament to years of training. She retreated from the table, melting back into the soft shadows of the dining room. But her mind was racing, replaying the linguistic fingerprint, analyzing it, confirming its impossibility. She moved to a service station, polishing glasses that were already spotless, her eyes fixed on the two men. Her senses were now painfully alert. She was no longer just a waitress. She was an analyst, a forensic linguist hunting for more evidence. The pen was now in Mr. Adnan's hand. He was uncapping it slowly, deliberately. Khalid was still talking, his voice a soothing balm of reassurance. He was explaining the indemnity clause, his hands making small, open gestures of transparency. And this section, he said in his smooth, flawed Arabic, simply ensures that our partnership is protected from external market fluctuations. A standard measure for mutual security. From her new vantage point, Clara had a clearer view of the document. It was angled slightly towards her. The text was in English, dense and legalistic. Her eyes scanned the page, leaping from clause to clause. Her gaze snagged on a single paragraph, the one Khalid was gesturing to. The words were stark, brutal, and utterly unambiguous. Hereby transfers all asset titles, free of all liens and encumbrances, to the receiving entity. Further down, another phrase jumped out. Assigns sole and exclusive liability for all territorial and international taxation to the primary signatory. It was the exact opposite of what Khalid had said. It wasn't a shield for a partnership. It was a guillotine for Mr. Adnan. It was a complete, irreversible transfer of assets and a simultaneous absorption of all tax burdens. The document was a predator, dressed in the sheep's clothing of legal jargon, and Khalid was the shepherd leading the lamb to the slaughter. The scam was no longer a suspicion born of a single misplaced word. It was a clear and present reality, laid out in cold, black ink. The polished performance, the shared language, the air of cultural brotherhood. It was all a meticulously crafted illusion designed to disarm one of the world's most powerful men long enough to pick his pocket on a colossal scale. The pen nib hovered an inch above the paper. A cold dread washed over Clara. Her entire being screamed at her to do something, to shout, to break the sacred, silent protocol of the room. But fear was a physical thing, a cold clamp around her throat. She could see her manager, Mr. Du Bois, standing near the host's stand, his posture rigid, his eyes sweeping the room with an eagle's focus. He was a man for whom protocol was religion. Any deviation was heresy. To interfere with a guest, especially a guest of Mr. Adnan's stature, was not just a fireable offense. It was professional suicide. She imagined the scene. The outburst, the confusion, the fury on Khalid's face. She would be dragged out by security, her incoherent babbling about dialects and clauses dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed employee. She would be humiliated, blacklisted. Her quiet, anonymous life would be shattered, but not in a way that saved anyone. It would be a pointless, self-destructive act. And yet, she could not look away from Mr. Adnan. She saw the quiet dignity in his posture, the lines of wisdom and fatigue around his eyes. He was not just a name in a financial journal. He was a man, operating on a level of trust that Khalid was expertly exploiting. He was being betrayed by the very thing that should have been a bond, a shared heritage. Her father's words came back to her again, not as a memory, but as a command. Truth has a moral weight. To see it and not speak it is to conspire with the lie. The conflict was tearing her apart. The trained waitress, the ghost in the machine, wanted to retreat, to polish another glass, to let the world of powerful men sort itself out. But the scholar, the daughter of Evan Reed, could not. The silence in the room was no longer peaceful. It was the sound of complicity. It was the sound of a crime in progress. The Montblanc pen touched the signature line. The black ink began to bleed into the fibers of the paper. It was happening. It was done. No, not yet. In that final, suspended moment, the waitress died and the scholar was reborn. A lifetime of practiced invisibility was shed in a single, decisive step. She moved with a speed and purpose that felt alien to her own body. She crossed the expanse of plush carpet in 5 long, silent strides. The hushed ambience of the room seemed to bend around her, a bubble of silence following her as she approached the table. She did not speak. She did not rush. She simply arrived. Mr. Du Bois saw her. His eyes widened in horror, a silent, furious no forming on his lips. She ignored him. Her world had compressed to the size of this single table, to the document, to the pen in Mr. Adnan's hand. She reached the table and placed her right hand flat on the polished wood, just inches from the contract. It was not a violent gesture, but it was absolute. It was a barrier. It was a full stop. Everything ceased. The pen stopped moving. Mr. Adnan's hand froze. The first stroke of his signature, an incomplete black line. The flow of conversation, the city lights outside, the very concept of time seemed to halt. Both men looked up at her. Khalid's expression curdled from triumphant satisfaction to sheer disbelief, then to rage. Mr. Adnan's was one of pure, calm confusion. He did not see a waitress. He saw an impossible interruption to his reality. Then, Clara looked directly into Mr. Adnan's eyes, bypassing Khalid completely. She took a breath and let the ghost of her father speak through her. The words that came out were not in English. They were in a perfect, formal, scholarly Arabic, the kind spoken in universities and royal courts, a dialect of pure, unassailable erudition. "Sir," she said, her voice low but carrying the force of absolute conviction, "I ask for your forgiveness for this intrusion, but you must not sign that paper." The shock that rippled through the air was palpable. It was not just her words, but the flawless, unexpected vessel they came from. A 23-year-old American waitress, in a generic uniform, speaking his language with more precision and formality than many of his own advisors. Mr. Adnan's eyes widened. Khalid's face, a mask of cosmopolitan charm moments before, had become a canvas of pure, primal panic. The game was broken. The ghost had just spoken. Khalid was the first to find his voice, a strangled, furious sound. "What is this?" he snapped in English, his smooth accent suddenly brittle. What is the meaning of this insanity? Security. Get her away from this table. Now. Mr. Du Bois was already rushing forward, his face ashen, ready to apologize and drag Clara away. But Mr. Adnan, without taking his eyes off Clara, raised a single, commanding hand. The gesture was small, but it stopped everyone. It stopped Khalid. It stopped Mr. Du Bois. It silenced the entire room. He then turned his full attention to Clara, his gaze intense, searching. "Speak," he said to her in Arabic, the single word an invitation and a demand. Clara did not flinch. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. She pointed a single, steady finger at the paragraph she had seen from across the room. "He told you this section outlines mutual protection from market forces," she stated, her Arabic clean and direct. "It does not. It transfers 100% of the asset rights for the entire portfolio to his holding company, effective immediately upon your signature. It is an unconditional and irrevocable transfer." She then gestured to another line. "And here it assigns all tax liability, both domestic and international, solely to you." He described it as a partnership. "This document makes you a benefactor and him the sole beneficiary." Then, she lifted her gaze from the paper and fixed it on Khalid. The final, devastating blow was not legal but linguistic. "And you, sir?" she continued, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more analytical, more academic. "Your dialect is masterful, a truly impressive performance. But the term you used earlier, for in full? No one from Riyadh's educated class would ever use that phrase. It belongs to the Shamal coast, to a specific community of pearl divers and fishermen. It's a beautiful, historic dialect. But it is not the dialect of the banking family you claim to represent. It was a complete and total demolition." She hadn't just accused him of fraud. She had deconstructed his entire identity, unmasked his history, and exposed the cheap theatricality of his performance, all in the language he had tried to weaponize. The silence that followed was profound. Khalid's face was a ruin. The color had drained from his skin, leaving a sick, waxy pallor. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had been so thoroughly, so precisely exposed that there was no defense left. He was a linguistic ghost, and she had turned on all the lights. Mr. Adnan slowly, deliberately, pulled his hand back. He picked up the contract, his eyes no longer trusting but scanning, analyzing the dense English text for the first time. He found the clauses Clara had indicated. As he read, his calm demeanor hardened into something cold and dangerous. A quiet, glacial fury began to emanate from him. He lowered the document and looked at Khalid. The look was not one of anger, but of profound personal betrayal. "You came into my home," he said, his Arabic now low and lethal. "You drank my coffee. You spoke my language to me as a brother. And you used that trust as a key to rob me." Khalid finally broke, stammering in panicked, desperate English. "This is preposterous. She's a waitress, a nobody. Are you going to believe this? This girl over a partner you've known for months?" But Mr. Adnan was no longer listening to him. The spell was broken. He saw Khalid for what he was. A hollow man, a con artist who had studied a language but had understood nothing of the honor it was meant to convey. He took out his phone and made a short, quiet call. As he spoke in low, rapid tones, two men who had been standing impassively by the restaurant's entrance began to move. They were not restaurant security. They were dressed in impeccably tailored suits, and they moved with the silent, unnerving efficiency of men who handled problems, not complaints. They arrived at the table, flanking Khalid, their presence an iron wall. The polished charade was over. The $200 million illusion, built over months of careful deception, had been dismantled in less than 2 minutes by a woman who was paid to be invisible. Khalid was escorted out without another word, a silent, swift removal that left a vacuum in the room. The other diners, sensing the gravity of the moment, had fallen into a respectful hush. Mr. Du Bois stood frozen near the table, his face a mask of terror and confusion, no doubt trying to calculate the magnitude of the diplomatic incident his employee had just caused and, somehow, averted. Mr. Adnan looked at him. "Leave us," he said, his voice calm but absolute. The manager nodded numbly and retreated, gesturing for the other staff to clear the area. Soon, it was just the two of them at the table, in the silent, empty corner of the grand room. The city lights glittered outside. The half-signed contract lay between them, a monument to a disaster that had been avoided by seconds. Mr. Adnan leaned back in his chair, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. He looked at Clara, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw past the uniform, past the severe bun, and saw the fierce intelligence in her eyes. "Who are you?" he asked her softly in Arabic. The question filled not with suspicion, but with genuine, boundless curiosity. Clara felt the adrenaline drain away, leaving a profound and trembling exhaustion in its wake. She sank into the chair Khalid had just vacated. "My name is Clara Reed," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She told him everything. About her father, the professor who saw languages as living souls. About her childhood spent in a library of dialects. About the years she spent in the Middle East, not as a tourist, but as a student, absorbing the culture until it became a part of her. She told him about the grief that had stolen her ambition and driven her into this quiet, anonymous life. "My father always believed that language was the ultimate truth-teller," she finished, looking at the useless contract. "He said you could fake a document, a history, even a friendship, but you can't fake the music of where you come from." Not to someone who is truly listening, Mr. Adnan listened to her entire story without interruption, his expression one of deep, empathetic understanding. When she was finished, he nodded slowly. He saw it all now. He wasn't saved by a waitress. He was saved by a scholar. He pushed the fraudulent document to the side of the table with a dismissive gesture. "The assets in question were not stocks or properties," he explained, his tone now that of a confidant. "This was the final agreement for my foundation to acquire the Al-Hassani collection, a portfolio of priceless early Islamic manuscripts. Some of them are the only surviving copies of key texts on science and philosophy." He paused, the weight of what was almost lost settling between them. Khalid's role was to act as the intermediary, using his family's supposed reputation to secure the sale from a private, reclusive owner. It seems his only real skill was forgery, of documents, of history, and of his own identity. He would have taken my money and disappeared with the real manuscripts, leaving me with worthless replicas. He looked at her then, a new light in his eyes. It was the look of a man who had just discovered a rare and valuable treasure. "My foundation is dedicated to finding, verifying, and preserving these texts for the world. It is a constant battle against forgeries, against clever thieves who prey on the trust of scholars. The work requires more than just money. It requires a specific kind of vision. It needs people who can hear the false notes, people who understand that the truth of an object, or a person, is written in details that most people overlook." He leaned forward, his voice earnest. "I am not going to offer you a reward, Miss Reed. A reward is a payment for a service rendered. This is something else. I am offering you a position, purpose. I want you to run my foundation's acquisitions and verification department. I need your mind. I need the way you see the world." 6 months later, the opulent silence of the Oberon was a distant memory. Clara stood in a climate-controlled, subterranean vault in Geneva. The air smelled of old parchment and preservation chemicals. She was not wearing a black and white uniform, but a simple professional dress and a pair of white cotton gloves. In front of her, resting on a velvet cushion, was a 1,000-year-old treatise on optics. With a delicate touch, she examined the calligraphy, the ink, the very texture of the vellum. She was not looking for what was there, but for what wasn't. She was listening for the false notes. Mr. Adnan stood beside her, watching her work not as an employer, but as a grateful colleague. In saving his fortune, she had saved a piece of the world's memory. And in doing so, she had finally reclaimed her own future, a future her father would have understood. She was no longer a ghost in a cathedral of wealth. She was a guardian in a library of history. She was home,